let's unpack this. We have just ingested a massive digest of global sources covering a really tumultuous decade in Terra. We're talking 5669 to 5678. And this period, it's just a study in political whiplash, isn't it? You've got nations like surging towards these socialist ideals while their neighbors are hitting the brakes hard, embracing nationalism.
That really is the core tension, yeah.
So our mission in this deep dive for you, the listener, is to sort of distill the key blueprints of this decade. We're tracking, I think, three main forces.
Okay.
First, that radical political polarization you mentioned. Then the really messy, often prolonged struggle for national identity after conflict. And finally, the fascinating role of the royal houses in all this chaos. Quite contradictory sometimes.
Yeah, the big picture isn't really one clear direction. It feels more like friction. You see these huge infrastructure projects, sweeping social reforms, but they're happening against this constant backdrop of, well, internal purges, deep social mistrust, old military conflicts still simmering. Exactly. It's like the world decided to aggressively reform itself and aggressively fight its old battles all at the same time.
So where does that friction show up first?
Well, it starts right away with the political systems. Those years, say 5674 to 5678, they're really dominated by what we're calling the Great Political Divide.
Right. And what jumps out from the sources immediately is that the political center just vanished. It feels like it completely evacuated. You see this really definitive shift towards hard-right conservatism in some places, matched by an equally definitive power grab by socialist and communist parties elsewhere.
Let's start with that. The Red Swing, centered in Varusia. In 56675, something pretty historic happened. The Communist Party of Varusia, the KPW, they achieved their first absolute majority.
Wow. So not just winning, but total control.
Exactly. This was more than an election. It felt like a complete system overhaul was on the table.
But, you know, absolute power often means absolute drama inside the tent, right?
Yeah. Doesn't it? And sure enough, only 2 years later, 56677, the KPW basically shattered. A big chunk of the more orthodox members broke away.
Okay.
They formed this new group, the Workers' Vanguard.
And why the split? What was the breaking point?
Well, this is what's so revealing. They didn't denounce communism itself. They denounced what they called the wokeification of the KPW.
So culture wars, basically.
Precisely. It shows how potent those issues, social justice, identity, progressivism, have become. Potent enough to fracture even a historically monolithic party like the KPW. It suggests that, you know, in Terra during this time, ideological purity tests were maybe more dangerous than outside opposition.
Interesting. Meanwhile, you had a different kind of socialism playing out over in Ixampa. They had a big celebration in 5674, didn't they?
They did. The 300 years of socialism and unity tricentennial. A major national moment celebrating their long-standing system.
But the sources suggest underneath all the celebration, there were some serious debates happening.
Constantly. Especially around one key thing. The sustainability of their big social welfare programs, particularly the sockling system, which they'd set up back in 5669.
Okay. Remind us the sockling system. What does that actually involve? For context.
Well, the sources point to it being this really expansive universal welfare package. It covers like everything from guaranteed basic income top-ups to nationalized housing and healthcare. It's sort of the ultimate expression of Ixampa's collectivism.
So the debate wasn't if they should have it.
No, not really. It was more about how they could keep affording it at that scale without, you know, breaking the bank, fiscally speaking.
Right. Okay, so let's flip that coin then. While Varusia and Ixampa are dealing with socialist complexities, other nations like Luthori were swinging hard the other way.
Oh, Luthor was a political earthquake. The Labor Party basically crashed, and then the Conservative Party, led by PM Joseph Brooke, formed this powerful hard-right coalition. They grabbed the premiership in 5676.
And this wasn't just a minor adjustment.
Not at all. It felt like a fundamental rejection of the previous setup. Brooke's coalition, they weren't messing around with gradual changes. They immediately started calling for pretty aggressive institutional reform.
And by 5678, they were pushing this controversial idea, consolidation of government.
Yeah, and that term is really important. It speaks right to that tension between, say, efficiency and democracy that was bubbling up everywhere. Consolidation of government, it basically meant centralizing a lot of executive and bureaucratic power.
To speed things up, cut waste, that kind of argument.
That was the justification, yeah. But critics immediately jumped on it, warning it was a slippery slope towards authoritarianism. You know, stripping away checks and balances, disguised as fiscal prudence.
And Luthori wasn't alone in this. Nadia seemed to be mirroring that move.
Very much so. under President Pudilova and Chief Executive Liliana Keitel-Thaler, who came in around 5670. Nadia shifted sharply towards a hard-right, very nationalistic model. Centralized authority was the name of the game.
So you really see this massive ideological muscle flexing on both ends of the spectrum.
Absolutely. And when politics get that polarized, trying to move on from conflict becomes incredibly difficult. So, shifting focus a bit, we need to look at how places like Kondrati handled the aftermath of their internal strife.
Kondrati, right. The sources show some promising signs of economic recovery by 5670. But economically stable definitely didn't mean politically healed.
Not even close. The nation was still racked by these purges, specifically targeting former legionaries and vanguardists.
And just to clarify for listeners, these were the main factions from their recent conflict.
That's right, the primary warring groups. So these purges basically guaranteed that any attempt at peace was being built on, well, vengeance, not really reconciliation.
Despite that, the government did try a gesture in 5672. They passed the Law of Return.
They did. It was meant to grant citizenship and the right to come back to groups like the Daleks, Silurians, and Solutions populations who'd often been targeted during the fighting.
But it didn't work out as planned.
No. And this is fascinating. By 5673, the law was flat out rejected by the former refugees themselves. They just didn't trust the state. Too much history, too much discrimination.
Wow.
It shows you can legislate forgiveness, maybe, but you absolutely cannot force trust. That rejection, it really speaks volumes about the human cost, the deep scars from the conflict in this decade.
Still, not all post-conflict policy failed there. Kondrati did manage to pass the Kondrati Rights and Disabilities Act in 5674, establishing some welfare foundations.
That's true. It suggests that even amidst the purges, some humanitarian progress was possible. Small steps, perhaps.
Okay, shifting to the diplomatic front, some actual wars did formally end.
Yes, the Rildenorian-Agalian War officially concluded in 5677. The terms involved things like returning detained fishermen, a small but tangible sign of peace starting.
And there was something about Marieth,
Right, the indirect recognition of Marieth as a special political entity.
which is very careful diplomatic language, isn't it?
Extremely careful. It signals progress towards stability, maybe hints at future statehood, but without fully committing. An end to open fighting, at least.
But peace is fragile.
Always. The ink was barely dry on that Rildenor resolution when a major coup attempt shook Rildenor's own internal province of Alken, also in February 677. It just highlights how even when external conflicts wrap up, internal forces are constantly threatening to undo the stability.
Okay, let's pivot now to the complete opposite end of the policy spectrum, Istalia. The Mokia government there just went all in on progressive reforms between 5672 and 5674.
The speed and the sheer scope of what they did is pretty extraordinary looking back. In 5673, they didn't just legalize recreational cannabis.
Which is already a big step.
Right. They decriminalized all other drugs, too, a totally different approach to public health law enforcement.
And at the same time, they lowered the retirement age.
To 59, back in 5672. That's a massive commitment to workers.
But wait, lowering retirement that much, decriminalizing drugs so fast, surely that must have caused immediate pushback. Economic jitters? Conservative backlash. What do the sources say about the fallout?
It seems the Murcia government was just determined to push it all through. They backed these moves with deep constitutional changes, too. They brought in worker co-participation proposals in 56673, giving labor a real stake in managing companies.
Okay.
And they pushed for these true equality constitutional reforms in 5672. We're talking same-sex marriage, adoption rights, expanded abortion access. It was a complete aggressive social justice package. They seemed ready to just weather whatever storm came their way.
It really is the perfect ideological counterweight to the nationalism and centralization we saw in Lutoria and Nadia.
It absolutely is. Yet, despite these deep, deep political divides, the sources do show one area where some consensus started to emerge. The ecological transition, the green shift.
Right. This is where nations maybe started agreeing on future needs, even if they couldn't stand each other's politics.
Pretty much. The commitment was global. You saw green parties gaining traction, Colopia in 5670, Dr. Anna Freeland Weber elected in Dundorf back in 5669.
And big money followed. Infrastructure projects.
Huge projects. The scale tells the story. Ellier's light solar farm, massive renewable capacity, finished construction in 5674. Then in 5677, Bianchi starts building the Golminula Dam, set to be their biggest hydropower plant ever. Nations were pouring billions into future-proofing their energy.
And significantly, we saw actual diplomacy bridging that ideological gap here.
Yeah.
Istalia, the radical socialist state,
And Ixampa, the established collectivist one.
they signed the Treaty of Romula in 5675, committing both to serious emissions reduction targets.
Yeah. For a moment at least, climate action created this rare little island of unity in a very polarized world.
Okay, so the last major trend shaping this decade. How did the old guard, the monarchies, handle all these rapid shifts?
Yeah, it's a real study in contrast. You see strategic modernization in one place and just systemic collapse in another.
Let's start with Khalistan. That seemed relatively stable, right? A smooth transition.
On the surface, yes. Empress Mary abdicated after a long 40-year reign. Then in 566-72, you had the coronation of Emperor Frederick IV and Empress Jennifer I. Pretty seamless.
But stability doesn't mean no ripples.
Yeah.
Empress Jennifer I made waves pretty quickly, didn't she?
She did. This was fascinating. In 5676, there was an audit of the royal gem vault. And afterwards, she publicly called the rapidly increasing value of the collection obscene.
Wow, a royal criticizing their own immense wealth. What was the reaction to that? What were the political ripples?
Well, it seemed like a very conscious move, a way to kind of align the monarchy with more modern public feelings, about wealth inequality. It probably minimized the political risk that huge hidden fortune posed. It positioned the new rulers as perhaps more in touch.
So strategic modernization.
Exactly. And that strategy extended to how they governed, too. Chancellor Erica Donahue, appointed in 5673, she oversaw this major decentralization effort.
The Ducal Council.
Right. Founded between 5674 and 5676. It granted a real measure of local self-governance within the empire, which contrasts sharply with that centralization push we saw in Luthori, for example.
So Khalistan was sort of giving up some power to stay relevant.
That's how it looks. Now, compare that carefully managed stability to the absolute train wreck happening in Nadia with Tsarina Anastasia.
Right, the Nadian monarchy just seemed to implode, a massive scandal.
Historic level, Tsarina Anastasia faced this huge corruption and embezzlement trial starting in 5676.
And it wasn't just bad press, was it? It became a constitutional crisis.
Literally. In 5676, the police actually raided the royal palace itself. Can you imagine the shock of that? Legal authorities physically breaching the historical seat of power? That one image must have done more to boost Republican sentiment than years of political debate.
Public trust must have just cratered.
Absolutely plummeted. Whatever fragility was there before, this shattered it.
It's really the difference between a monarchy trying to engage with the modern world, maybe reluctantly, versus one being dragged into court over its past.
Precisely. And while all this political drama was unfolding, modernization here, collapse there, culture became this really potent tool. Soft power. Like Princess Nicolette and Anto Collins achieving the Triple Crown in surfing in 5671.
Yeah, that was huge, wasn't it? More than just sports.
Definitely. Surfing became this symbol for Nadia health, youth, global connection, especially when the princess started coaching young surfers herself in 5674. It was smart branding in a way.
And other nations invested heavily in culture, too.
We see that. Aghelion poured 150 million crowns into elevating their performing arts in 566-75, trying to boost their global cultural standing. And their city, Cartablanca, really took off as a major tourist hotspot around 5674.
So these cultural investments were maybe necessary distractions, or perhaps the more civilized face of nations still wrestling with some deep political divisions.
Could be both, couldn't it? A way to project stability and normalcy, even when things underneath were far from stable. #TagAtro.
So if we take a step back now, look at the whole decade, 5669 to 5678, what's the main story we should take away? What's the defining narrative for you?
I think it's a story of two parallel tracks, running side by side, but often clashing. On one track, you have these wild, unpredictable swings in ideology. The KPW splitting apart versus Luthori's aggressive conservative surge.
Right, radical polarization.
Exactly. Then on the other track, you have these really dedicated efforts to modernize infrastructure, welfare systems like the Green Shift or Estalia's reforms. But, and this is the key, these efforts are deeply fragile.
Undermined by that persistent social mistrust we talked about.
Constantly. The rejection of Condrati's law of return is the perfect example, isn't it? You can try to mandate reconciliation, but you just cannot legislate away generations of trauma and historical grievance.
Yeah.
So this raises the core question of the decade, I think. Even while nations are electing new leaders, passing all these progressive laws, claiming they found stability, the sources keep revealing these persistent undercurrents, violence, high-level corruption, constantly testing the limits of governance.
And There were stark reminders of that violence breaking through, weren't there? Martial law had to be declared in Utoristan in 5674. That followed a devastating terrorist attack aimed right at the government leadership.
It shows that beneath all the political debates, violent conflict was never really far below the surface.
And the corruption reeking right to the very top.
Absolutely. In 5677, you have the resolution of that long-running Klenenberg murder mystery and the fallout, the actual resignation of a sitting president, Kui Oppensteiner, amid all these explosive conspiracy revelations.
So what does that really mean for governing in Terra, when stability isn't just tested by enemies or rivals, but by ghosts from the past, by deep-seated corruption right inside the halls of power?
Yeah.
The price of political power in this era, it seems less about achieving policy goals and maybe more about whether you can keep your own historical secrets buried. What questions did that raise about the true cost of power?
That tension, that underlying conflict between the outward appearance of progress and this sort of inward decay, that feels like the real legacy of this incredibly turbulent decade. We'll definitely be watching how those unresolved issues continue to shape the next era of Terra.